It always makes me nervous when we do the message first, just because you're used to standing, that someone's going to end up standing the whole way through. And Clay Boone was close, but thankfully we didn't do it. Good job. Hey, if you have your Bible with you, if you'll pull it out, we're going to be in Revelation chapter 3 this morning. Revelation chapter 3, whether it's in paper or on your phone. And this is what we're going to do. Is I'm just going to read 2 verses, and then we're going to seem like we're going to go off on a really long path, and then we're going to get back to it at the end. So this is Revelation chapter 3, and I want to read verse 15 and 16. And it's important to note that this is Jesus speaking. So these are his words. It says this: I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. I want to read that again, just to make sure we don't miss anything. So starting again in verse 15. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. And I don't know about you, but when I read that passage, I read it and I just go, what? Like, it's really weird. It's really weird that those would be Jesus's words. And it's really weird that that's the metaphor that he would use referring to us. And as this passage has kind of been taught to me over time, there's an important historical background to this that people say, oh, this explains it, that this is written to a specific group of people. And so Jesus is speaking to this church in a city known as Laodicea. And the intriguing thing about Laodicea is that there are these springs that were within the city. Now, in this day and age, kind of in more primitive times, hot water and cold water were extremely beneficial. So hot water could be used for like bathing, it could be used for cooking, it had various other purposes. Naturally, cold water was obviously refreshing when people were out working in their farms all day and doing other things like that. And so hot water and cold water had their unique purposes, and water was kind of scarce in this area. But Laodicea had this difficulty that they had this thing, water, in abundance. They had plenty of water, but they had it in its most useless state. And so when people have explained this passage to me, they've gone, so that's what's so interesting. That's why Jesus uses water, because they had lukewarm water. But there's a part of the passage that still is unexplained to me that I find very confusing, is that when he's giving us this metaphor of cold, lukewarm, and hot, he says, I wish you were either hot, which we would take in matters of faith. You may have heard the phrase like someone who's on fire for God, or someone who, it's kind of denoting someone who's like really excited, really passionate about what's happening, that God really has a hold of them. So that's hot. So he says, I wish you were either hot or cold. Now, cold would be someone who is against God, like someone who is not just disinterested, but someone who is actively against God or working against him. And what Jesus says in this moment is he says, I wish you were hot or cold rather than just being lukewarm. The hot I get. The cold I don't understand. Like, why would God prefer us to be actively against him than just passively disinterested? Right? This is confusing, is it not? He says, wish you were cold rather than lukewarm. And that's what I want to talk about today. And I want to explain it first off through statements that we've made as a church. We don't have many statements that we've made. A lot of times people ask, like, what's your policy on this? And our general policy is, we'll figure it out. And that's gone well so far. But one of the statements that we've made as a church is our mission. And our mission, we say it every single week, is to lead people to be passionate followers of Christ. And that's incredibly important to us, because we say that is what we're focused on. And oftentimes people come in, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this kind of ministry? Why didn't you participate in this event? And we say, because this is our mission. And so we're only going to do things that we see as directly leading to this, because we view this as incredibly important. And sometimes people will question, why do we pick the word passionate? Like, why of all the words that we could choose to describe the type of followers of Christ that we wanted to lead people into being, why do we choose the word passionate? And the thought that most people have is just because, like, it's a nice word. Like, it's kind of poetic. It's kind of feely. It sounds good. And you go, yeah, I want to be passionate. But people ask that, like, why not? Why not, like, committed? Why not devoted? Why not engaged? Why not fully committed? Why not any of these other things? Why do we pick the word passionate? And it has far more to do than just simple poetry. And this is actually explained through the only other real statement that we've made as a church, which is part of the FOR movement. And as part of FOR, we've kind of had this as the central idea that we've said, in an age where churches are known by what they're against, we want to be known by who we are for. We believe that God is for people, which means we are for people. And so one of the central idea of this whole FOR thing has been that, like, oftentimes people think that churches have people as enemies. Whether it's an individual person or a people group, that these people who don't believe what we believe or who have a different morality than we have or have different values that we have, that these people are our enemies. And we said when we search through the pages of Scripture, we see something very different. We see God is for everyone. He is fighting for every individual. Now, sometimes people take that to mean, well, that means you're for everything. We go, no, that's very different. We can be for everyone without being for everything. We can look through that. We can look beyond the person to see what's really there. So, like, there are things as a church that are our enemies. Some people would usually chalk that up to, so that means like other religions, different sets of morality, different belief systems. Some would even label as like our biggest enemy is like agnosticism, the belief that you can't know God. And I would say out of all those possible things, all those possible social movements, all those possible moral positions, out of all those things that could be our enemies, there is one that stands as greater than all the rest. And I believe the biggest enemy we always have as a church is apathy. And so we're in this series, Blank in Faith. And today we're going to fill that blank in as we've talked about the boundaries to belief. We're going to fill that blank in with passion in faith. Because I believe that one of the greatest obstacles any of us will ever face when it comes to our relationship with God is a lack of passion or engaging in apathy with our lives. And the reason why is because Christianity is not just a movement, not just a religion of logic, but it's actually a faith of emotion and desire. And this is important because it's not less than logic. Like, you don't have to suspend logic. You don't have to quit thinking to follow God. And that's very important to me. I believe that your faith should fully engage your mind at all times. But if you limit it to just what you can understand in your head, you have severely limited your faith and caused great harm to your belief in God. And we see, like in Matthew 5, Jesus' words, he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now he doesn't say in that moment, blessed are those who pursue righteousness. He doesn't say, blessed are those who have attained righteousness. No, he says, blessed are those who deep within their souls long for something that only God can fill. He points to our desires as being essential to our faith. And you may have heard the phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. And the parallel for people is that you can put everything right in someone's life, but you cannot cause within them a thirst for what will truly satisfy. That has to happen from some other place. That desire has to be in place from something that is more mysterious, something that's more spiritual, something that's more beyond us. And I think what happens is we kind of shrink back from this conversation on emotions and feeling and desire because it gets kind of confusing. And so we kind of like pull it back for a couple different reasons. For one is many times our emotions betray us, right? Like there are going to be Sundays that you wake up that you're not going to feel like a Christian, but you are. Because it's not rooted in how you feel, it's rooted in what God has done for you on the cross. And so to equate our identity in Christ just simply based upon a feeling is to way overestimate our own importance. And on the other side of it is we kind of shrink back because we think like logic and ideas, these are things that we can grasp. These are things that we can control. I can't control my emotions. I had a conversation with my 3-year-old, Emily, the other day, a heated conversation with my 3-year-old. And she was on the couch, and she had misbehaved, and she's crying, and I made the statement, "You cannot get up until you stop crying." And she looked at me with tears running down her face and screaming, and she goes, "But I don't know how!" And I thought that's kind of fitting for a lot of us. That we feel things we don't want to feel at moments that we don't want to feel them. And so when it comes to something as important as faith, when we feel like we have no control over our emotions and desires, we just shrink back from it and we exit that conversation. But this is what I believe, is I believe that if we do not pull desire and if we do not pull passion into the conversation on faith, we have greatly limited what faith is and what God seeks to do in our lives. And I think we are maybe at the most critical spot in the history of the world to have this conversation. Let me explain why. The book that everyone thought would tell our future was the book 1984 by George Orwell. Some of you may have had to read this in high school. People will often talk about an Orwellian future, and what they're doing is they're referring to his work in 1984. And in this book, it describes a future that is dismal, that is bleak. And the reason why is because there is an externally imposed opposition on people, namely in the form of the government, who's referred to in the book as Big Brother. And what happens in this account is Big Brother, the government, comes into our lives and they begin to take our freedoms from us and they put control in our lives instead. And while our freedom for choices are taken away, while our freedom for decisions, while our freedom for information is taken away, one of the most significant freedoms that is taken away in George Orwell's account is the freedom to pursue our passion. And so what we're left with is a world that is void of feeling, that just goes through the motions, but has no desire. And people have kind of guarded against that, and they've stepped back and they've kind of viewed it as, that's what we need to protect against. And I'm not saying that's not the case, but I would like to make the argument that George Orwell was not the prophet. A guy by the name of Aldous Huxley was. Aldous Huxley wrote a book titled Brave New World. And in Aldous Huxley's account, it gives a future that is very different from George Orwell's. You see, in Aldous Huxley's account of the future, it was not an externally imposed opposition against us. It was one that we placed on ourselves. It was not Big Brother coming in and removing our ability to pursue our passions. It's the ways in which we willingly gave them up for lesser things. Let me show you the difference between George Orwell's future and Aldous Huxley's. You see, in George Orwell's account, books are banned, and so no one has access to new ideas or new stories. In Aldous Huxley's account, no one reads, because there's more entertaining forms at our disposal. In George Orwell's account, what we have is we have a captive culture in which Big Brother comes in and they tell people exactly what to do. In Aldous Huxley's account, we have a trivial culture that is incredibly focused on things that do not matter at all. In George Orwell's account, information is scarce and it's hoarded by the government. In Aldous Huxley's account, important information is drowned out in a sea of irrelevance. And one of the key quotes I love in his work is he says, "You must never underestimate humans' ability to distract themselves from what really matters." In George Orwell's account, people are controlled through pain, and they are tortured if they don't do the things that they're supposed to do. In Aldous Huxley's account, people are controlled through pleasure, that we engage in lesser forms of life because it's easier. Now I say that and I go through that, and my hope is this. Is my hope you're a little shocked. That we look at the different ways that the future can play out, and we always assume that it's something from the outside that was going to remove passion from us. But we may need to come to the conclusion that maybe we have removed passion from ourselves. And what we have as a result is we have a culture that has in many ways become numb to what matters most. It strikes me, I find this interesting that when we talk about passion, one of the things that people are really passionate about is food. And some of you just get pumped up about food, which I'm all for because life is better when people are excited about food. It intrigues me in the discussion that there are two large eating disorders when it comes to food that are commonly talked about, bulimia and anorexia. Bulimia is when you eat a bunch of food and then you throw up to get rid of it. And for some reason, all the things that go with bulimia rhyme. Like it's like splurge and purge, scarf and barf. I don't know why everything in bulimia has to rhyme. But the other one is anorexia, in which your body image is so distorted that no matter how skinny you are, you think you need to get skinnier. And so as a result, you simply do not eat. And what happens is that as you don't eat, your appetite goes away. And I wonder how true that is for many of us when it comes to passion. That we haven't fed our appetite for what really matters. And as a result, we are starving, but we're not hungry. They say that if you go 3 days without eating, you're not hungry anymore. I wonder how long many of us have gone without God. And then we wonder why we have no appetite for Him. I want to show you an example of how far gone I think our culture might actually be. Recently, posted to my Facebook feed was this video. I'm not going to show you the actual video because it's very disturbing to me. The video is of a young adult man with several people standing around him beating up an elderly gentleman. He punches him, he pushes him to the ground, he kicks him repeatedly, and then he stands over him in defiance. This is not the first video that I've seen posted or shared with me of someone beating up another person. And we watch things like that, and we think, no, stick it on the video. I know it's bothersome, but let's leave it with that slide. We watch things like that, and we think, that's awful. That's so terrible that someone else would do that. That's so upsetting. But here's my problem, is why is it taped? Like, why do we have a video account of what has happened? Because what that means is that in a moment when someone else was in need, when someone else was hurting, that there was someone who was able to do something, who instead of intervening and helping, saw this, what was happening right before their eyes, as a form of entertainment. And I think we see no greater example of how far gone our culture actually is by our desire to tape when our response should be to help. I'm reading a book currently that's about the genocide in Rwanda. And we talked about this probably 3 years ago, and I'm hoping we're going to talk about it again in a couple months. But one of the most intriguing parts of the book I found is these reporters, they're driving down the road, and it's late at night, and they're kind of in this extremely deserted area, and all of a sudden they hear this lady make a loud whooping noise, kind of like a yell. And they just kind of stop, and they can't quite figure out what's going on. And within a couple minutes, they hear from different parts around them, they hear men make this whooping noise back. And they kind of pause, and they wait, and they see these different men running into the situation. And so they get out of their cars, and they kind of follow along behind them. And when they get up to the situation, they realize that this woman was about to be raped. And so what she does is she gave this cry of distress. And people around answered her and came running. And so they turned to the men who made the whooping noise back, and they went to interview them, and they said, why did you do that? Like, why, when you heard the cry for distress, why did you make the noise back? They go, because that's what you do. If someone makes the yell, you yell in response, and you come running. They go, yeah, but why did you? Because this is a foreign idea to us in many ways. And this is their response, and I thought this was absolutely fascinating. Is they said, if you hear the yell, and you don't yell in return and help, you have no life. Now, what they're saying in saying you have no life is not we're going to be put on trial and we're going to be executed by the government because we didn't come help. They're saying if you're not willing to help someone else who is in need before you, what kind of life do you actually have going through your veins? Like, what is actually there that is worth saving? And so the summary that the guy makes is he says, we have this culture in Africa where people are all living separately, yet somehow they're together and connected. While for us, we're all together, yet somehow we have found a way to live separately. And what we find, if we're willing to admit it, is that the passion which was meant to guide our lives, the feelings and desires, which were in many ways meant to serve as a compass for who we are as humans, is incredibly broken and unbelievably depleted. So how do we get that back? I think first we must understand what passion is. Let me show you. There's two common definitions for passion. The first one is this: a strong and barely controllable emotion. These are the things that you feel intensely about. These are your family or your job or maybe a significant hobby. And these are good things. It's good that you feel passion for different things. Later today, I have every hope that if the girls in my house go to sleep, that I will get to sit for several hours in front of a TV and watch grown men who I do not know move a ball down the field and yell at them while they do it. I'm very excited about that. I don't know how many of you seen this video. This video is referred to as Star Wars Boy. This is one of the first videos on the internet to go viral. I do not know anything about this young man or his background or his friends or family, but he likes what he's doing, does he not? And at first I want to laugh, but honestly, my real response is I wish I was that excited about what he's excited about, right? He is having a blast, and I envy that kid in many ways. And so there's that first definition of passion. We need to move on, otherwise I'll watch it all day. There's the first definition of passion, a strong and barely controllable emotion. But there's also a second, the suffering and death of Jesus. Now look at this. This is weird. The way we refer to as the suffering and death of Jesus, and many of us were only clued into this when Mel Gibson came out with his movie years ago, is the passion of the Christ. What does that have to do with it? Now we'll come back to Jesus in just a second, but I want to explain where we got this word passion from. The word passion originally comes from a Greek word which means to suffer. And so inherently, what we're saying when we say we're passionate about something is we're not simply saying that we're excited about it or we have this barely controllable emotion of enthusiasm. What we're also saying in the same moment is this is something that we are willing to suffer for. And I think in a lot of ways, what's happened is we've separated the two. And we've simply made it about excitement and not also the thing that we're willing to suffer for. And it's when we combine the two together that our lives become fascinating. And our lives become something that is actually worth living. When you combine a great feeling with something that you're willing to suffer for, stories get interesting. Let me explain it like this. If you were to read a book, or probably because of what Aldous Huxley says, watch a movie on a story, this would not be an interesting story for you. Bill likes Sally. Sally is naturally attracted to Bill. So Bill and Sally get married. That's not that interesting, is it? But if the story was this, Bill likes Sally, and Sally friend zones Bill because she got amnesia from a car wreck even though they're married. And so Bill slowly helps her remember their love for each other, but it doesn't work. And so he sets her free, because if you love something and set it free, and it returns to you, it's yours forever. And she does. Starring Channing Tatum and Rachel McAdams. I really like the Vow. There you go. That story is far more interesting. That's exciting. I read a piece recently on a concert pianist, one of the best concert pianists in the world. They had gotten done with this huge performance, and so they're out to eat afterwards, all the members of the band and orchestra, and she's sitting across from the conductor, and the conductor looks at her, and he just goes, "You played brilliantly tonight. You played wonderfully, but you didn't seem to enjoy it. Why do you do it?" And she kind of has this realization. She goes, "No one has ever asked me if I enjoyed it. I just assumed because I was good at it that I had to do it." we consistently mistake passion for talent. That lady today is now a book editor. She's not the best book editor in the world, but she loves it and is willing to suffer for it. That it is when these things come together that we find out what passion really is. And this is why we refer to it as the passion of Christ. It's not something that Jesus feels deeply about, and it's not just something that he's willing to suffer for. It's when these things come together, we get a clue as to what God really cares about and where his desires really are. And so what we see on the cross is we see an incredible account of suffering. We see leading up to the cross, we see Jesus' emotional suffering as he's anxious and has concerns about what's going to happen. And he prays incredible prayers, intense prayers, because of the emotional distress that he's under. We see the incredible physical suffering. That we understand the most common way that people died from crucifixions was not bleeding out, but was actually suffocation. That is, you were nailed through your hands and through your feet. And with Jesus, is he had a spear stuck in his side, and he was up there over time that his muscles would give out. And as a result, the ligaments and the tendons in his bodies would tear. And so as he's up there bleeding, quite literally, his lungs collapsed, and he could get no more oxygen in his body. But the most significant suffering that we actually see on the cross is the spiritual suffering that Jesus endures. That we understand what Scripture says is that in a moment, the sin of the entire world was placed on his shoulders, and he felt that. Now, think back, this is important. Think back to a moment that you felt shame. And for some of you probably have to go back to middle school, which we all felt it then. Like a moment where you were embarrassed to be the person who you were. You felt uncomfortable in your own skin. And I think for most of us, we would say we would endure physical pain instead of that. But that's what Jesus felt, not just for himself, but for all of us. He felt the sin and the guilt and the shame of the entire world placed upon his shoulders in a single moment. And in 1 Peter, we get a description as to why he did it. It says, "For Christ died for sin once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God." And what that verse shows us, this is so important, is that crucifixion, the cross, was not God's plan B. It's not like he created mankind and then all of a sudden sin entered the world and God was up in heaven going, "Oh, what am I going to do now? I got to fix this. I got to figure out a way to figure it out." No, before creation even began, God knew of our rebellion. And so because of that, he knew the price that he was going to have to pay to restore a right relationship with us. And so instead of the cross simply being God's kind of emergency plan B, we need to understand that creation had crucifixion in mind. That God knew before he created you that he was passionate about you and therefore willing to suffer for you. Now this gives us volumes about how do we find passion in our lives. Because we think the key to finding passion is you have to find the thing that you're really emotional about, that you really emotionally care about, and then you have to be willing to suffer for it. But Jesus shows us it's exactly the opposite. You must first find the thing that you are willing to die for, and then you live your life just for that. And so how do we get that passion? How do we get that in our lives? You've probably heard the phrase, passion cannot be taught. It can only be caught. And that's exactly what Jesus models for us. In John 6:44, it says this, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up on the last day." I love that phrase in the middle. Unless the Father who sent me draws them. Let me explain it like this. I think one of the most important roles I have as a parent is to develop desire within my children. Not just to modify behavior, not just to give them a sense of morality, but to develop desire within them. Because right now their desires are for candy and iPad games. And if the whole world was candy and iPad games, they'd be thrilled. Like that would be heaven for them. But I think one of the most important things I need to do is I need to stir something within their hearts that shows them that these things do not satisfy and these things do not fulfill. And there is a better life out there for you than just that. And that's what this verse shows us God did for you. That in our numb culture, that videotapes people getting beat up and feels very little of what we're supposed to. That before you moved towards God, that God was stirring something within your heart. That he was cultivating something within your very soul that would give you a desire for him. And I think often we get moments where we gather in a church and we go, if we are asked the question, why are you here? Like, why are you here? And most of us would say, well, whether it's because like we've always been here, or someone invited us, or we just kind of stumbled in, like we have a desire for God. Like I'm intrigued, whether I know him, whether I'm trying to figure him out, whether I just have kind of like a faint idea. There is something within us that we go, I want to be here. I want to be a part of something with God. And if we ask, where did that come from? We would just go, well, I just feel it. But what this verse shows us is that before you moved an inch towards God, that he was stirring something within you that would give you a longing for him. That in our continual nature to settle for pleasure and easy and insignificance, God was cultivating something within your soul that would make you long for him. And I think that's so distinct that we understand it in those terms. That God was not cultivating within you an idea, but a desire for him. I think the most common way that we approach God is we want to approach God on a like and dislike basis. And so what we have to do is we have to reduce the creator of the universe down to ideas and beliefs. And so we can go, yeah, grace, I like that. Love, I like that. Forgiveness, I like that, except when I have to forgive. Sin, no thank you. But what we see Jesus doing distinctly in this moment when he comes into our world and enters the cross is he changes the category of the discussion. That no longer can we approach God simply on a like-dislike basis because he's not an idea. He's a person. And this changes everything. We begin to understand that immorality is not simply immorality. Immorality is actually rebellion in the relationship. And in place of an idea and a belief system that we can like or dislike, what we truly find that we have is we have a love that is worth everything. And that the closer we move towards Christ, the further we gain towards him, the more we're going to feel how we were originally intended to feel. The more we will laugh, the more we will cry, the more we will rejoice, and the more we will be bothered. The more we will feel deeply and our inner desires will be stirred. That the further we move away from Christ, the less we will be able to tell what is wrong with the world. And the closer we gain towards him, the more we will rejoice in what is wonderful. The greatest obstacle any of us will ever face in our lives when it comes to faith is the slow descent into apathy. And that what God has been trying to do from the very start, before you moved an inch towards him, is to awaken something within you that has been dead for far too long. To restore life to your lungs and to your souls and to your hearts. That you would begin to see the world as he sees it. And you would just not know him intellectually, but that you would feel him deeply. And that he wouldn't just be an idea, but that he would become the deepest desire of your heart. In Revelation 3, it says this. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot.
I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear, so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes, so you can see. Those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline, so be earnest and repent. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. I find it striking that the first thing that Jesus says we need to do is we need to come to grips with maybe how far gone we actually are. And I think we struggle with that. I think the most common response that people give to how are you doing is, I'm fine. And as a result of that, I'm fine culture, we have allowed ourselves to become numb to things that we were always meant to feel at the deepest level. And so Jesus says, first, recognize it, and then turn to me. And I find it amazing that the offer that he gives is not to correct everything that's wrong, but to be in relationship with him. That the first step that he gives a metaphor of in terms of our relationship with God is not to correct our morality, but to have dinner with him. And that is the first step towards restoration. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. Let's pray. Father, I know personally, I need to be more comfortable with the struggle to not be numb. And my tendency always, and I'm afraid will always be, to say that everything is fine, to say that everything is all right. But God, I want to be bothered by what's wrong. And I want to rejoice in what's good. I don't want to find myself years later walking through life numb to those around me. And at times when people feel deeply and I do not, and at times when people rejoice greatly and I do not, it scares me. And so, Father, my prayer for me and my prayer for all of us is that we would come to an understanding that you do not simply want to be an idea to be studied, but you want to be the deepest desire of our hearts. And so, Father, let us understand that a move towards you is not just a shift in values, is not just a shift in morality, but most significantly, it is to reawaken something that has been dormant within us. That you call us to feel as you feel, to struggle with your struggle, and to celebrate with you in victory. And so, Father, help us to regain a passion that only you can give. Amen.